Hey creeps, it's horror free for all.
I hope you're hungry for tonight's murderous menu.
For over 40 years, the horror anthology subgenre in film and television has graced us with iconic properties, such as Creepshow and Tales from the Crypt, to enshrine one of the most critically overlooked aspects to the horror subgenre, horror comic books. While Tales from the Crypt and other sister properties like Perversions of Science, Weird World, and Two Fisted Tales populated the late 80s throughout the mid to late 90s across various television stations to millions of viewers watching at home, it was really the success of the cult favorite 1982 film Creepshow and its follow-up in 1987 that laid the groundwork in the silver screen that the mainstream horror audience was ready for comic book originated content. Despite Creepshow's stories not originating from comics like its Tales from the Crypt brethren would later employ, even it owed its success to anthology films that came before it, specifically with two films under the Amicus film banner, Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror. Released in 1972 and 1973, respectively, Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror each adapted stories from various EC Comics labels from the atomic age of comics, reintroducing at the time the novelty that inspired an entire generation of horror writers and artists who were fans of the brand as children. It is speculated that imitators in the 1960s reportedly took notice as well, as one of the main two creators of the EC Comics brand, Al Feldstein, saw an unauthorized short film of one of his stories at a film festival in 1966. As many horror fans would mainly take to the EC Comics brand as the head honcho of the subgenre from the 50s onward into the new millennium, with the mainstream success of Tales from the Crypt's TV show, spin-off cartoon, game show, advertising campaign, and 3 standalone films to name a few, the silent majority of horror comic content went relatively unnoticed and often ignored by other anthology shows of the time. While it's speculated even Rod Serling's Twilight Zone lifted stories from comics off of other publishing houses like Marvel Comics and ACG to name a few, even that tidbit of knowledge is about as deep as the comic book to episode or movie segment iceberg usually goes. However, what if I told you that there are comic adaptations directly in anthology shows of recent time that aren't based in EC Comics lore? Pick your jaw up off the floor because they do exist, but sadly, there aren't that many. While I'll only be sharing examples I have personally come across, I am aware of the possibility there are more of these out there that this video won't account for. So by all means, to those watching, please feel free to let me know which ones I missed out on down in the comment section down below. But that being said, we might as well start out the video with an adaptation that technically didn't get adapted into an anthology show or as a segment of a movie. I know it sounds like I'm cheating, but this example is too cool not to share. From the story by Bruce Jones, who will appear a few times in this video mind you, and is often considered by many for being one of the greatest and most influential comic book writers for science fiction, fantasy, and horror in the 70s to mid to late 90s, filmmaker Artis Moreno adapted a short film based on Jones's story called Terminated that was featured in Jones's short-lived but iconic Twisted Tales series by Pacific Comics in 1983 in issue number 5. In the comic story, we see a small isolated community corner the residence of a hideously deformed leper as he's chased away and meets his graphic demise. However, the punchline to this short is that where his body ends up will have lasting ramifications of the community moving forward. For how simple and basic the story premise is, the short film adaptation basically nails the story to a T with no major changes. While I'm sure there could be a whole backstory addition added onto it, or even revelations of the aftermath of the occurrence if a dedicated adaptation writer chose to do so, the short film embodied the spirit of the comic short well enough and was entertaining for what it was trying to do. The next comic story to be adapted also may feel like a cheat, but trust me, I have my reasons. In Unexpected issue number 217 by DC Comics in 1981, there was an adaptation by Tom Sciacca of a popular Japanese urban legend of the mythical spirit of the Yuki-onna, better known as the Snow Woman or Woman of the Snow. You may recognize two recognizable yet different takes on the story in two popular Japanese films of the 1960s, Quaiden from 1964 and The Snow Woman from 1968. In Quaiden, the more traditional version of the story of the woodchopper and the wife is adapted. Amidst a blizzard, a man and cohorts are visited by the spirit of the Yuki-onna, who has many depictions, but the popular version is a deity who sucks the blood of her victims and leaves them in a frozen state. And the sole surviving man makes a deal with the Yuki-onna to never tell a living soul what he witnessed that night in exchange for his life. And if he ever does tell a living soul, he shall pay the cost of breaking his promise with his life. Shortly after his fateful encounter, he meets a beautiful woman of his dreams, falls in love, marries her, and has children with her. Upon the 10th anniversary of his fateful encounter, he decides to finally tell somebody what happened to him, who happens to be his wife. Unfortunately, the man discovers his wife isn't what she seemed to be, and now comes consequences for his broken promises to the Yuki-onna. As displayed in Quaiden, the Snow Woman is furious that he broke his promise and wants to kill him, but chooses not to do so to spare the children sleeping nearby. She simply disappears out into the snowstorm at night, never to be seen again, leaving the husband alone to raise his children. In the Snow Woman film from 1968, the story is more so the same, but the ending is different. We see the Snow Woman bid farewell to her child before she leaves, and her child tries to run after her, but the husband stops the kid as the two watch the Snow Woman disappear into the snowy night. There is also versions of the story out there that sometimes don't have children involved, nor a wife necessarily as well. And the change can be as simple as something as like the deal the man made to save his life was in vain because he was still going to freeze to death in the blizzard, to even in some instances, when the Snow Woman leaves the man for good, the man runs after her only to die in the cold outside over heartbreak. Whichever the case may be, in most versions of the story, two things remain constant. The husband is never physically killed by the Snow Woman, and the children are left unharmed. Which brings me to the comic adaptation from 1981. The story plays out similarly to the Quaiden telling of the legend, but the ending is different. In this version, the Snow Woman decides to leave as usual, but for punishment of the husband breaking his promise, she turns the kids into snow children and disappears with them into the night, leaving the man all alone. Now you might be asking, what does this have to do with anything? Well, in 1990, with the cult classic film Tales from the Dark Side, the movie being released, Michael McDowell wrote an original story for that film called Lover's Vow, which is essentially a retelling of the Yuki-onna legend, just as a reskin of something else. But he seemed to have borrowed elements from the comic adaptation here. In this segment, we follow a down-on-his-luck artist, as he is faithfully attacked one night in a city alleyway along with his friend by a menacing gargoyle that's come to life. After his friend is killed, the gargoyle marks the man and offers to spare his life, only if he promises never to tell a soul what happened to him. The man begrudgingly agrees, and soon after, he sees a woman in need on the street, and he rescues her. The two hit it off almost immediately, then they later hook up, and soon after she moves in with him. Then there's a 10-year time jump, and we see that the couple now is happily married with a few children. Since it's coming on 10 years since the night they met, the husband decides to tell his wife what happened right before he met her. To his horror, the wife reveals her true form as the gargoyle and heartbreakingly transforms the children as well. But unlike the legend the story took inspiration from, the man is brutally killed by his wife and his children. And then, his family fades to the skytops of the city skyline. While there are evident differences in the Yuki-onna versions that we discussed, and with the Lover's Vow segment, it appears that since I've only ever found the ending of the legend that was told in the comic, that perhaps Michael McDowell was drawing the most inspiration from that version of the story. Since McDowell wrote for Tales from the Dark Side's television show as well, and the show already adapted a story from a different issue of Unexpected by DC Comics we will discuss shortly, I can't help but believe this to be true, until it's either disproven or debunked, of course. Now that we are done with the iffy examples, the remaining 4 stories left to talk about are pretty direct. For my first choice, I'm going with the final story of the iconic Twisted Tales series from Pacific Comics, and its final issue number 10, which is called If She Dies. Written in an uncredited writing role by David Karen, the story is about a sad man who stumbles across an old bed in an antique store and purchases it for his comatose daughter so he can bring her home at some point. However, the bed has brought upon a ghost of a little girl who is looking for her stuffed teddy bear. The man knows that the bed came from an orphanage nearby in town and visits a convent of nuns asking about if they knew of this girl or her stuffed teddy bear. The man finds out that the ghost of the little girl comes from a distant past, but one nun has in possession the teddy bear as a keepsake of the little girl's memory. After some convincing, the man is given the teddy bear, and through conversation with the nun, he learns that the ghost of the little girl might be there for a purpose, to help save his daughter. The man then heads to the hospital where his daughter is at to take her home with him to put her in the bed, despite the doctors telling him that she's brain dead and will likely die without hospital equipment. Once home, the dad places his daughter in the purchased bed and places the teddy bear with her in hopes that it can heal her. After this, a twist ending comes as the daughter wakes up after the dad took the teddy bear away from the bed, and she asks her dad where the teddy bear was, signifying to the man one of 2 things just happened. Either it's his daughter who somehow learned of the teddy bear's gift while in her comatose state, or it is the ghost of the girl who haunted the bed being reborn into his daughter's brain-dead body. Not even a year after this comic story debuted, it was turned into an episode within the first season of the 80s Twilight Zone reboot. While it's mostly faithful, the adaptation did choose to change up some things. Like the opening scene fleshes out that the man and his daughter were involved in a car accident, and it was through the sorrow of bad news that brought him to see the ghost of the little girl, who only appeared after the bed was brought home in the comic version. In the episode, the ghost girl signals the man to a sidewalk sale at an orphanage, and is signaled by the ghost girl to buy the bed. Since the man is religious, he thinks it's a sign to help save his daughter. After that point, the story plays out relatively the same, until the ending. While the comic story spelled out to the reader what possibly happened to the daughter, the episode awkwardly ends right after the girl asks for the teddy bear. Both versions of the story have their strengths and weaknesses, as the comic version is more eerie and tense, but lacks the context the episode provides, and it also happens to have the better ending. While the episode's greatest strength is building the emotions better, along with the context addition making the story feel a bit more whole. However, that came at the cost of the eeriness, and the abrupt ending of the episode left much to be desired, even though you can see the comic's ending if you really do think about it. I prefer the episode surprisingly enough, but the comic story is about as good narratively with the better ending, making both worthy of the experience for sure. Our next story comes from the mind of Bruce Jones, who we've already mentioned before, and it debuted in the first issue of Twisted Tales in 1982. Called All Hallows in the comic version, the first season of Creepshow's TV series in 2019 would adapt the story, but retitle it to All Hallows Eve. In the comic version of the story revolves around a group of 4 high school boys who are way too old to be trick-or-treating, going door to door in the neighborhood to get some treats. But we see as the audience that every person who answers the door is unprepared for trick-or-treating and seems afraid of the teens' presence. This continues until the boys stop at one house, which drops context that they're potentially involved in doing something to one of the kids that used to live there at the house. The story culminates at one final house where the boys demand to know where the kid that lives there is. The kid's parents disagree on what to do, but the kid is handed over to the teens by the father, and they make off with the kid. As they make it to their destination, it's revealed that the four teens lost their lives 7 years prior due to a tragic accident that happened behest of a group of kids playing a harmless prank that turned deadly. And each year, they've taken the lives of the 7 responsible for their tragic deaths. And the kid that they took is the last one remaining. We see in horrifying fashion what is to happen to the kid, and perhaps a potential future for the teens now that the night is over. The Creepshow episode basically keeps the entire story intact, but makes a few additions. For example, there is a 5th character added into the episode, and she perhaps is the love interest of the leader of the group. There is also a change to make one of the boys the younger brother of the leader as well. Aside from that, other notable changes come when the teens end up at the home of the kid they are after, and we get an entire diatribe from the kid's mother on the matter. And there is a flashback right before the climax of the episode that shows how the teens died. Even the ending is expanded on, making it a bittersweet conclusion and goodbye for the teens involved, as they now can enjoy their eternal rest. I'm just going to cut to the chase. The episode was able to do so much more with the idea than its comic counterpart was able to do. Both are intriguing, both are brutal, and both have similar hitting twists. But everything the episode added to the already very good story made it even better. This is one where you can't go wrong either way, but the episode is an absolute classic. The next example comes from DC Comics' Unexpected series from issue number 197, called My Ghost Rider the Vampire, released in 1980. Fans of the cult favorite anthology show Tales from the Dark Side might recognize this story, as it was adapted to screen in Season 3 by the writer of the story himself, Scott Edelman. The comic story is about a horror novelist visited by a vampire one fateful evening with a weird request. The vampire is struggling to find a safe place to sleep during the day since humanity has expanded to the point it's putting a strain on the vampire, so the vampire suggests that he can live at the writer's place in exchange for true vampire lore to help the author's story stand out. The author agrees, and the following day the vampire's belongings along with his coffin are shipped to the author's residence, and the author sees firsthand the price that comes with housing a vampire as he watches it feed on a young woman outside. The author learns that after feeding, the vampire is ready to drop true lore to him. The biggest piece of lore being popular media has it all wrong in how to permanently defeat a vampire, as it is easy to come back after either being exposed to sunlight or pure silver with a drop of blood, or a woman's remorseful tears. The author uses this information to write a new vampire novel, and it becomes a smash hit. To the point, a book tour is on the way, and a celebration party is planned to be at the author's place. When the author demands the vampire leave before the party, the vampire reveals he wants some fame and glory as well. The author then pulls out pure silver and exposes it to the vampire, crumbling him to ash. Right before the party is to begin, the man scoops up the vampire's remains and places it into a chalice. Shortly after guests begin to arrive, one guest decides to go into the author's office to get some aspirin, but injures himself above the chalice, and a drop of blood makes its way in. Before we see if the vampire will crash the party, the story fades to black. The episode adaptation keeps the core idea of the comic story, but dramatically expands onto it. The opening introduces the author's assistant into the equation, as she is there as the author's resident vampire expert. She's helping him in hopes that her own work will make it to the publisher that the author writes for. After she leaves, the author is greeted by a real vampire. The author discovers the vampire has power over him and wants to access a secret windowless room in the domicile, and strikes the same deal as we saw in the comic story about the author learning real vampire lore for his books in exchange for the vampire living there. Off screen this time, the vampire moves into the secret room, but it still must feed. The author offers his maid as a tribute, and after the vampire's feeding, the vampire reveals to the author the same reveal as the comic story did about blood or a woman's tears reanimating a dead vampire. Shortly after, the author gathers as much lore as he could and publishes his first book, and it's noticed as a bestseller. He swiftly fires his assistant, who pays him a visit upset and lets him know his book was good, but he's still a talentless hack. After the assistant leaves, the vampire lets the author know he wants royalties for the author's book and future books. Upset that the vampire is trying to double-cross him, the author tries to sabotage the vampire while he's feeding by placing silver in his coffin and brandishing his own silver weapon. What results is a battle of wits and strategy, which the author overcomes after weakening the vampire with sunlight and piercing a silver weapon into his chest, turning him into dust. After the fight, the weakened author passes out, only to be awakened by his former assistant knocking at his door. The author scrambles to put the vampire's ashes into the secret room inside of the coffin, but the secret room latch decides not to function properly. The assistant comes in to tell the author of a lawsuit claiming she wrote his books, even though she knows she didn't write his newest one. Noticing that she's drunk and carrying his silver weapon, the author tries to keep his cool, even when the assistant cuts herself and begins bleeding. As the author tries to find something to help, the assistant enters the secret room and sees the ashes inside of the coffin, realizing the book he wrote is real, and allows a drop of blood to fall into the ashes. Once the author remembers the lore the vampire said to him, he panically rushes to the coffin to find it empty, and it's there he is ambushed by the vampire. When the vampire is finished with the author, he tries to take care of the assistant as well, but the assistant has come prepared. The two make an agreement to be partners, and give the vampire credit and royalties the author beforehand would have never dared to give him. While the episode feels almost drastically different from the comic counterpart in some ways, the rudimentary sense of the story remains intact for the most part. The biggest changes, of course, come from the addition of the assistant character in the episode and changing the final act completely to incorporate her character further. Both versions were amusing, but I have to say the episode just does more with the concept and has more of a punchline going for it than its comic counterpart. I feel I'm starting to become a broken record at this point with the episodes winning out here, but trust me, there is a reason for this. Last but certainly not least, we have another Bruce Jones classic that some have claimed is the greatest Bronze Age horror comic story of all time.
That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
This one comes from the iconic Warren magazine known as Creepy. It debuted in issue number 63 in 1974, and the story is called Jennifer. The story is about a hunter who stumbles across a terrifying scene in the middle of the woods as he sees a young woman about to be brutally killed by a disgruntled man. The hunter shoots the man to prevent him from harming the girl, and when he goes to check on the man utters in his final breath the name Jennifer and dies on the spot. When he goes to check on the girl, he finds that she has a hideous face and is nonverbal. The man then deliberates on how to bring the girl to the authorities and get himself out of getting in trouble for killing the man in the woods. The man uses the plan in court which gets him out of trouble, but since the young woman has no papers, identification, records, or anything confirming who she is since she's nonverbal, the judge wants to place her in an institution. But the man's conscience convinces him to urge the judge to allow him to adopt the girl, who has taken the name Jennifer. The man is granted custody and brings her home to his wife and son, who are horrified and in disbelief the man would do that in the first place. It's made clear early on that Jennifer has wild tendencies, and after biting the wife places an ultimatum on the man that either Jennifer leaves or she's leaving him with his son. The man tries to take her back, but he sees the stress in Jennifer's eyes and decides against it. After a few months, one day Jennifer is found to have brutally killed the family's cat and ate it. The wife and son leave the man alone with Jennifer for good. The man soon after finds that Jennifer has taken to wearing his wife's clothes and presumably sexually assaults him. After this, The man has reached his boiling point and sees a traveling freak show coming to town, where he will give over Jennifer to live for the remainder of her life. After giving his house keys to the freak show owner, the man returns home after a few days in hopes that Jennifer wouldn't have tried escaping to find him at home. But he makes a grisly discovery in the refrigerator of the freak show owner's mutilated corpse, and that Jennifer never left. Not knowing what else to do, he moves into an abandoned farmhouse out in an undisclosed location in the middle of the woods to hopefully hide Jennifer away and take his own life. As the man spirals into alcoholism, one day he finds a newspaper that sparks hope into finding a new job, but he sees a headline of a missing child case involving someone that resembles Jennifer. In horror, he goes back to the farmhouse and discovers Jennifer feasting on the child. Enraged, he takes Jennifer along with a weapon out into the middle of the woods to end her life. And once he finds a spot, he's interrupted by a hunter nearby who shoots him as he sees what's about to be done to Jennifer. As the hunter comes to check on the man, he says in one final word out loud before he perishes, the name Jennifer. If you've seen the cult smash hit anthology series Masters of Horror, you probably recognize this story as a season 1 favorite, directed by the influential horror director Dario Argento. The adaptation is surprisingly faithful, but a few things were changed aesthetically here to make it more accessible to the times. Scenes were added on to also fulfill a 50-plus minute runtime. And because it's Dario Argento, the story got a full-blown erotic facelift. In the episode adaptation, the man in the story is a police officer who overhears a woman about to be killed in a park in the city. The officer shoots the man to protect the girl, but the man who was shot ushers in his final breath the name Jennifer and expires. The officer's partner finds the scene and they head back to the police headquarters with the girl. While in the police station, the officer sees Jennifer being taken away, and later that night, while his wife tries to make love with him, he can't shake what happened with Jennifer earlier and he assaults his wife. Once the man realizes what happened, he feels compelled to learn more about Jennifer. The following day, he discovers that Jennifer has no records and is nonverbal, and has been taken to an institution. Not wanting the girl without a family, he heads to the institution to get Jennifer and bring her home to become part of his family. The following morning, Jennifer scares the officer's wife and bites her on the lips, and the son is quote-unquote shaken as well. The wife issues an ultimatum like the comic version. However, here, when the officer tries to take Jennifer back to the institution, Jennifer essentially seduces and sexually assaults the officer before they reach their destination. After that, he brings Jennifer home, which starts a commotion with the family. Jennifer darts inside angry and is found by the others to be eating the family cat. Shortly after, his wife and son leave, and Jennifer is spotted playing with a little girl next door. When the officer comes home that night, he finds Jennifer eating the little girl. Losing his sanity, he heads to bed, where Jennifer yet again seduces and sexually assaults him. From here, like the comic, the officer finds an ad for a freak show coming to town, and tries pawning her off the same way. And the same refrigerator scene, of course, happens. Deciding enough is enough, he leaves home with Jennifer to live off-grid in a farmhouse far away. He picks up alcohol to manage his sanity with Jennifer, but he takes a job at a nearby grocery market and makes a connection with the woman owner, who also has a son that works there. Jennifer spies on the officer and grows upset and spots the owner's son. She follows him to a local teenage rager out in the woods later that night and catches his attention to chase after her into the woods. The boy is attacked, of course, and when the officer arrives late after staying late at work, he discovers Jennifer brutally consuming his boss's son. Outraged, he decides to take Jennifer out into the woods and meets a similar, almost identical fate as the comic counterpart. While the comic story was chilling as is, the adaptation in the episode went the extra mile to accentuate the story. While I'm not a fan whatsoever of the gross implications with Jennifer being highlighted multiple times here, as her age is undisclosed, it still manages to register about the same as the comic version, albeit stretched out to meet a specific runtime. For what it's worth, though, the extra death included was less of a sudden thing to start the climax off like the comic counterpart did, and the story was done great justice even with the modernizing changes it had in the aesthetics. I'd say I slightly prefer the episode, but it's not by much. Both are must experiences in either form, though, if you are a fan of anthology horror. Now, you might be wondering, why did I prefer the episodes to the comic counterparts in almost every example I shared in this video? Well, it's rather simple. You see, comic stories like these naturally have so much room to work with given the page constraints and space they're given inherently. Often than not, these type of stories rely on the art to fill in context clues, or if you're lucky, a summation box to bridge one scene to another that allows these stories to sometimes expand. But it should be no shock at all that it's quite easy to expand a story like a comic into an episode or movie segment better because you have more fluidity there, which translates more room to add on to things that you simply could not pull off in the comic. The closest cousins to these examples shared live almost exclusively in various EC Comics endeavors, primarily Tales from the Crypt. And some might be shocked, but while these examples are mostly faithful in some capacity to their source material, EC Comic properties had absolutely no shame in going the in-name only approach, especially in Tales from the Crypt. Regardless if they were faithful or not, though, there's one thing that Tales from the Crypt proved back in the day, and that is genuine comic content being adapted can work well and can be a cultural phenomenon. Okay, the Crypt Keeper was also an adorable mascot, but almost every horror anthology comic out there has one too. Given that the last thing associated with Tales from the Crypt released in 2006, and that Creepshow just ended after 4 seasons on Shudder, and only ever adapted one actual comic story into its IP, it begs the question, can a new horror anthology show based on a collective of horror comic short stories come out today and continue where these two IPs left off?
It's a great idea. I'm with that.
My answer would be yes, but it would take people truly passionate, sifting through thousands beyond thousands of horror comics to find good stories to expand on and adapt to screen. I'm assuming also a myriad of rights issues as well might be a cloud in the way in order to make this hypothetical thing happen, but I'm here in full support if it does. Thank you all for watching this video. If you liked it, please feel free to drop a like, share this video. If you aren't subscribed, feel free to do so as well if you like. If there was any examples I missed out on in this, please share them in the comment section down below. Until next time, stay spooky.